Okay, there's nothing between this presentation and the keynote with the exception of beer afterwards. So I promise you, or wine, I promise you this is going to be very practical. So this is going to be kind of brass tacks. And some of the things you've probably already heard about or know. So forgive me if I'm being a little bit on my soapbox, but there are things we forget in the passion of getting stuff done that we have to kind of take a step back and think about. So before I start, I always do a quiz like I did earlier about who ate dessert before their lunch. How many of you have ever had to execute upon an HRIM project? You know, you had to put a new application in, a new tool, okay? How many of you were halfway through it and realized that you didn't really have a business process that you were actually solving for? Come on, there's more of you in here. You know it, right? Because we get enamored by a tool, we get enamored by an executive who likes a tool, we do some things that are unnatural because the budget's getting ready to dry up, so you jump into these activities and then you realize halfway through, I don't know if I'm solving for the right problem. So this is to give you guys some practical things to think about as you think through that. So of course my first slide and my favorite quote that I not only use for work but at home is Albert Einstein's. If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in 5 minutes. And as HR practitioners, we probably live this every day, and we probably consult with our advisors or to our clients every day about what is the problem you're solving before you jump into solutions. And that's really the basis of what this conversation is about today. So you already kind of saw some of these pieces of perspective when we had the Global Force presentation related to what's happening in this new millennium in terms of expectations of our employees. We talked a lot about, from going to your static appraisals to more enablement and helping people be successful, looking at more ways of getting information through crowdsourcing than traditional surveying, things about networking. You saw a lot of information related to the hierarchies are kind of gone, and it's sort of how do you maneuver effectively across an organization up, down, and around where titles don't matter. You've also seen a lot of things around corporate values and more into employee experience. The notion of big words on paper in offices talking about corporate values are less important than what the employee experience is every day. And it's more about the action than the words. So a lot of these things are flowing through what we work on every day. So it's important to keep this in mind as you think about how does this impact the work I do on behalf of the HR organization. And then there's global trends. So has anyone here not heard about GDPR? Okay, and if you are, I could sell you some really good consulting on that. So you've got this global data privacy thing that's only going to get, I think, more complex. You've got the UK, but you're going to see other countries take part in that. I mean, Germany's already, a challenging place to work in related to data privacy. So you got that going on in the world. You've got data security. And oh, by the way, I work for Symantec, we do security. But this notion of mobile, and we've all pushed a lot to mobile for all the right reasons. People want to have flexibility, but with that comes ongoing threats and possible data breaches. You've got the unstructured workforce, and we're all dealing with this notion of redesigning how people do their jobs, whether it's thinking about using networks through freelancers, whether it's contingent workforce, whether it's how work actually gets done through technology, whether it's remote working, whether it's places that have really amazing real estate footprints that bring collaboration together. It's changing, and people have different expectations related to that. It's also this notion of digital strategy in terms of people getting much more oriented towards digitization in terms of how they do their jobs every day. And as you see right here, 78% of companies view important and 5% have strong programs in place related to digitalizing their business. So a huge opportunity here for us. And employees, again, are expecting to work faster, smarter, and we have to get ahead of them on that front. And then who isn't talking about robotics and artificial intelligence? It's like the buzzword, and what scares me is we don't know that much about it, but we know it could be helpful to us. So again, it's a solution looking for a problem. So that's another thing we have to keep in place to think about. So before I jump into my experience in this, I want to give you guys some constructs. And I can imagine you could all put your name up on this and have a similar story about just lots of business transformation and change. And why this is important to me is it talks to you all about how to think about transformation in your organizations while the business transforms, because you can't sit still while the business goes forward. So just a couple key points. In 2015, we were a storage and security company. We spun off a company called Veritas. We had to stand up the company to either spin it or to sell it, and so it actually was bought by private equity. And if anyone ever done a divestiture before? Where's Tracy? Okay. Okay, it's a lot harder, I've come to find, than acquisition. And it's even harder when you want to stand it up to look really great and the company that you remain in has to deal with all the stranded costs, right? So we had that complexity. But the good news is we became a cybersecurity focused company, which was really critical for us to be, able to get the market back to where we wanted to get it towards. Then in 2016, we acquired a company called Blue Coat, which was completing our portfolio. It was not anything that overlapped with our business. It actually was no customers were we selling to, nor did it have similar products. It was a fantastic way to expand our portfolio around cybersecurity, et cetera. But with that, we also bought a new leadership team. So that was kind of what I would call a reverse acquisition. We were about $3 billion in revenue. They were about $900 million in revenue. They're about 2,000 employees. We were about 12,000 employees. But when we brought them over, a large part of that Blue Coat organization took on leadership roles, including the CEO. So we had to deal with that whole sort of shift and change of a big acquisition and then kind of rolling that into the Symantec organization on top of all the stranded costs that we were trying to take out of in terms of real estate optimization, data center optimization, spans, layers, all the tricks you pull out and levers you pull to get to a better cost envelope. And of course, we had about 5 ERP systems to make things more complex with all the acquisitions we'd done in many years and had not integrated. So lots of cleanup. Are you getting tired yet? Let me know, because I certainly am. And then because that wasn't quite enough, in 2017, we had both an enterprise and a consumer company. So you guys know Norton, I'm certain. We went ahead and bought LifeLock, which was a fantastic acquisition for us because it completed the whole sort of consumer digital safety platform. So it was not only can we protect your endpoint and your devices, but we can also protect your credit and your data. So a chance to bring in another organization into the business. And then with that, we also were bringing the whole enterprise go-to-market together by combining the Blue Coat sales force with the Symantec sales force. And then in 2018, because we've gotten so good at divestitures, we decided we were going to also divest ourselves of our website security business because it was not a business that we felt was good for our business, and it was something that was around certificates and certifying websites, and it wasn't a business we felt we should be in. So we divested ourselves of that. In addition, we kept doing a couple more M&A acquisitions, tuck-ins. So net is lots of change, and I don't think I'm unique in that front, but as part of that change, we all had to manage through about $550 million of cost takedown over 2 years. So that meant every organization had to tighten their belt. And that meant, in particular, your G&A functions and your HR in particular had to look at ways to do work differently and better. And that's when I started to say, okay, I think my operating model needs to shift a bit in terms of HR business partners versus shared services versus how they interact with the business. And I got to start using technology as an enabler, because it's where we're at right now. We had enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be really productive and effective. So I want to talk a little bit about how are we using that data. And again, I think all of you probably could put this same chart up. But if you think about how you evolve HR through business-centric practices, this is how we use it today. So we use data and metrics for things like the core of digital HR, right? How you report data analytics, how you report predictive, how you look at your headcount and workforce planning, how you think about your real estate optimization. It's also about pulsing. We've talked a lot about this throughout the day, about how do you have constant feedback, closed loop, how you talk to more of the employees and less to the management about what's happening in the business. So we have a pulsing technology that we use. It's about creating, which is the workspace that promotes culture. So how do we have a culture that supports our blended workplace and diversity? So I would say we had a very traditional real estate footprint. We had to consolidate it, and a lot of the offices are like back from the 1980s and maybe a couple of 1970s, which might actually be back in style. But we've now had a much more collaborative design style. So with that, we had to really look at our metrics, our demographics, what did people want, how people badged, how people show up for work every day. We've also done around applying, and as I mentioned earlier, the whole notion of mobile. So we're finding, as many of you know, is employees want to be treated as consumers, not only at home, but also at work. So that's everything about just-in-time information to be able to make decisions at your desktop or on your mobile device. It's how you think about training. It's how you think about approving a requisition. All the stuff is how do you apply that so the employees can get to what they need to get to as quick as possible so they can get back to the art of doing their jobs. And then the last thing, as we also talked about, was this whole investing, the work we've done around building health and wellness insights, because if a healthier employee will be a better employee, and a more well-informed employee will be a more productive employee. So how do you help them with both their employee wellness and financial acumen? So we think about the workflow of HR having all these different inputs of data coming into it at any one given time. And by themselves, they're probably individual point product solutions, but together, how do you make them flow? And all these together obviously lead towards an exceptional experience and retention for your employees, because employees want to know that when they come to work, they're being invested in. So now I'm going to get into the real brass tack basics, and I'll give you some examples. But you've all seen this before, and I'm not going to drain the slide, but I think what's most important is start with the problem, not the solution. And I feel like very often we jump to solution because we can see it, we know it, but until you take the peel back the onion, there are aspects you haven't even thought about. So the basic need is the problem stated clearly and concisely, but what does your data say? Is it one problem or several joined together? What are you thinking to try and gain towards impact? Is it faster time to market? Is it a cost initiative? Is it about quality? Is it about compliance? What are you trying to shoot towards in terms of your outcomes? What's in the way of getting to those outcomes? What do you expect from an ROI? We talked a lot about that in some of the breakout sessions around being able to speak the language of the business around the ROI. And then who do you have to really stakeholder manage? And I can't say that enough. I often find in my experiences in HR, and perhaps I'm part of the problem, is that you have got to be really good at stakeholder management. You just can't go out and design something that you think you would like to have. It has to be something that's shared, because that's the only way it's going to get adopted. And then how do you measure your success, which is part of the ROI. So I always ask my team, before we dive into solving the problem or the solution, let's figure out what the problem is, and let's answer all these aspects so we actually get to the right solution. Because very often we put lipstick on things, we do the cosmetic thing, and we feel good and do high five, and the next day it bounces back up to us. And then in terms of desired results and outcomes, this is a big one, obviously. So does it need to be done extremely well? Because I think what we happen to do sometimes in HR is we have way too many initiatives. We don't always maybe do the right load balancing and the resourcing, and everything has to be done 110%. And I believe perfection is the enemy of innovation, and you can't do everything perfectly. So you have to be able to trade off what has to be done 110% GDPR, and what could be done 80%, which might be, the gym. Maybe the gym's not, premium style, right? But you have to pick and choose what you're going to invest in. And then does it need to be done efficiently? And does it even need to be done? I think very often we create more stress on ourselves because we begin to think about, I've got to get this done, as opposed to taking a step back and saying, would it be better to wait to do something that's more holistic, or can it even wait and can we do something later? And then again, how do you measure it? So again, measurement, because data helps you build your ROI, and it also helps you figure out what you got wrong so you can go back and get it right the next time. And I like this slide, and I think many of us have experienced this before. You can't do a presentation without a Dilbert, especially for HR folks. But this is all about, how's the project coming along? It's a steaming pile of failure. It's like 15 drunken monkeys with a jigsaw puzzle. How's your project coming along? Fine. So very often when we do this type of work, I hate when I sit in like IMOs or PMOs and you're doing integrations or big projects, and this the person who's like, everything's green on their slide. Like, don't believe that, right? Like they're kidding themselves and they're kidding us. Yellow and red are good because it helps you really understand, is this really going to work or not? So these statistics were kind of startling for me, not only because they're big numbers, but I think I've lived through these. Things like for every $1 billion invested, 122 million is wasted. 75% of business and IT execs anticipate their projects will fail. And then fewer than a third of all projects were successfully completed on time and budget. This is all natural business stuff. We all deal with puts and takes, good projects, bad projects, but there's so many things we could get right if we thought about first what we're solving for. Let's talk about the framework then that my organization has been using related to how do you deliver results. So again, I get back to define the business need. What's your problem statement? What are you shooting for? Who's important to get involved in it? And what's the data that's going to make your case? How do you look at optimization in terms of the ease of use of this? Is it going to be agile and fast moving? Is it a time impact risk concern? Are there budgets that are under pressure? And for me, in the example I'll share with you, it was about budget. It wasn't about Amy being this technology innovator. It was around, I got to find a different way to deliver HR capability and services. And it's not going to work the way I have it today. It can't be this people intensive. And then determining the desired experience that you want folks to have. So first of all, I think we can get very internally oriented about what works for us. And you have to look outside in, which is looking from what the eyes of the employee or the business into what does this do for my business partners? What does it do for the HR organizations? You have to look at both. It can't just be easy for HR and hard for the business. And I would venture to say we have, on a daily basis, 1,000 piss-off factors to our employees because we do something that we think is going to help them be more productive. In the meantime, it's not easy to use, not easy to understand, and they don't use it in the first place. So this is an area I think, in particular, HR could be better at. And then my favorite statement, and one other best practice I'd like to share is on my HR leadership team, I have a technology architect. He's not an HRM guy that sits down and makes certain Workday works, although he knows that stuff. He's forward thinking, looking at different ways to leverage technology. He's looking at things like bots, how do you optimize Workday, et cetera, but he's there next to me. And his favorite saying is, technology does not drive the business. Business needs to find the technology. So let me give you an example. Now that I've given you all this rich information or frameworks, I'm certain all of you know, but here's how it really comes to light. And I don't think I'll be alone in here. So when I first joined Symantec, we were about 20,000 employees because we were, storage and security. And then we split and we spun off the Veritas side. So I went from maybe 325 employees down to about 210. I have Workplace as well. And the notion was, well, you have less work to do, so you're going to have less HR folks. And in most reasons, I would understand that, but we still had all the stranded costs, all the crappy systems, all the sort of manual things that we were doing, and I could not afford to continue that pace of support without changing my model. So in order to support a global HR organization, I had to think about a services organization differently. So the first thing, from a business perspective, I had to support a global HR operation. We're in about 46 countries around the globe. It shifts and changes on a given basis based on acquisitions or divestitures, but we were complex. We had to manage our costs. We had to also make certain we could manage our responses and experiences. And the point here is that we were using email as a way for employees to come and ask us questions that were like, tactical or transactional requests. And then we had like 4 people sitting in a dark room, I feel certain, in India, reading each of these questions and then trying to understand where would I send that email to the right expert to go solve it. Now, I know that sounds crazy. That was only 4 years ago, but that was 4 years ago. And clearly that's not how we want to run our business. So I had to really think about, how do I shift this both from the business need but also the user experience? So as people say, there's a different way I'm going to get my questions answered, but still going to be with speed and quality and the response that I need. I also had to optimize things such as the trade-offs. How fast could I go and what would it cost me? And thankfully, my IT organization had just introduced ServiceNow's their sort of process system, so they were a great partner to help me evangelize why it was good for HR. We also had a 60-day dual process for our operational separation, which is when we separated both in the Veritas and some of the acquisitions, we had to get pretty fast towards separation and breaking up the organization. So I needed a fast tool that would help me with data, would help me with service delivery needs. Had to be global and had to be something we could continuously improve upon. And then the desired experience had to be outside in. So again, I had to look at what would the business use as a methodology and how to help my employees have a better experience, how to improve the HR experience in terms of working on the right results. So as opposed to having 4 people sitting in a back room trying to physically be routers to the right person, we created a whole sort of knowledge management capability. We actually put in the ServiceNow as a business process flow and ticketing system. We started to look at ways to take that money that we were able to save and reinvest it in growing this capability in the organization. So it required a lot of business process reengineering, a lot of data archiving and management. How many of you have HR pages that are like old, either don't exist or the material and content is not up to speed? So we had a lot of cleanup to do in this front. So after we went through this whole journey of introducing ServiceNow, moving about hiring 45 people in India to be our services center, global solution center, which was not only managing the intakes of ServiceNow, but also helping with immigration, global mobility, new offer, hire letters. They were able to do more complex things. They're also actually working on the web, so that weren't just sort of data aggregators. They were leveraging ServiceNow to be that, so they could do more important things in relationship to the HR organization. I was able to save $11.5 million in cost. we were able to get to a 5 by 24 sessions or work schedule, so we were able to mostly fit the needs of the globe. We had the right people working on the right activities, meaning I had a group of people in India that were using this capability and then using it to also help the Americas and EMEA work on the things that were most critical. HR business partners working on less mining of data and more of the analytics and intelligence around what you're going to go do with that data. And interestingly enough, we had this great net promoter score of 67, which is pretty high. And very often the hard part about these ticketing systems or business process systems is people don't want to do it. I just want to call somebody and just make it go away. And only the CEO, I think, can do that. But what we're finding is that once people go through the experience, they're finding, oh my gosh, one, this is a lot faster. Two, I get a better response and it allows me to get to what I need to get to faster because of that. And thirdly, the best benefit is now we can begin to manage workflow because I understand what the most often requests are of the business, and then I can begin to build more self-help and push more to the web so I don't have to actually open a ticket to answer the problems. It also helps me with resourcing and load balancing. So again, all those criteria I talked about related to how do you think about solving a business problem through technology were reviewed as part of this whole process to make certain we hit those outcomes. And as you can see, we improved our call response time and our call resolution time. So there's a lot more metrics I could share here, but the notion of this conversation is how do you start to use these business problems and using technology as a way to solve it, but first doing the work up front before you dive into the solution. Okay, changing gears a bit, to bot or not to bot. Is that who's working with bots right now? Tracy, are you working with bots?
We're in our finance area.
Okay. Anyone else in HR? Can I ask what you're working on, if you can just shout it out?
Just an interface process.
Okay. With other functions?
No, just within HR.
With HR? Okay. Anybody else? So it's nascent, obviously, right? And we are just engaging with them as well. In fact, they're starting first with our finance organization. We happen to, and I'll talk a little bit more how we're using them a little bit in the HR front as a shared business process. But my big, again, reinforcement would be don't just run to bots because you think it's going to save you money. There's lots of implications with bots in relationship to the investment, the productivity gain, the humanitarianism around the employee experience. But be clear about what the problem is that you're going after, define your challenges and outcome, and then evaluate your solution. So let me talk a little about what we're doing here. So right now we're partnering, and again, any partners I'm referencing, I'm not doing a commercial for, I'm not getting paid for them, I'm just letting you know who we've worked with, right? So we had ServiceNow in that example, and this one it's PwC. So PwC has come in to work with us on how do we look at key business roadblocks across the business. And HR, in typical fashions, kind of at the bottom of the list, right? Because there's lots to be done on quote to cash and all the aspects around how we flow business through our quoting and sales process. But in the meantime, we said we'd love to do some work with you, and so we were able to influence them based on our business case to go after it. So we looked at 40 different things we felt were key business roadblocks to HR doing their business effectively for the business and for the employee. And we picked 3 that we thought were pretty critical. One was the employee experience related to things such as repetitive data entry and repetitive practices. So an example, onboarding, which is like the dearth of my existence. Right? Everybody's. It's like I've never seen one go great except as, like if you're hiring one person, maybe. For the first employee in the company. So the issue is, and I'll state this, you get an employee in and the manager has to fill out all this paperwork and it's the same thing over and over again. And there's no one connecting IT with finance, with HR, with procurement. There's all these little things that you may have thought you fixed, but it'll continue to pop up to be a problem. So why don't we think about ways to leverage bots to say, let's pre-populate what we know are the most often needed provisioning things that the manager would have to fill out. Takes the work off of the manager and auto loads. You can begin to align those types of provisioning to the type of role you're hiring for, and therefore then it becomes a much more automated practice. So things that maybe wouldn't touch the employee directly, but would make the onboarding process a lot easier. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more we can do, but we're starting slow to understand how do we really, understand how to think about bots in the workplace and how do we leverage them for HR. So our goal was to really focus on the most core outcomes, the things that are the most basic aspects of the employee experience, and then work up the stack of more complexity and sophistication as we get more comfortable with the notion of bots. And again, a little preachy here, but technology should be thoughtful. It should be based on outcomes, and you need to weigh it out. Is it a right decision? There's very often times that we will maybe pay more for technology than we actually need and only turn 20% of it on. And then you wonder why 5 years later your whole version that you're using has now become Frankenstein because you've done too many things to it without thinking about what's the end state of what I'm trying to use. So how do you really think about what you're solving for and get the right kind of technology to support it? And then the last part, which is really, I've sped this pretty quickly because I really want to have a conversation with you all, is, what did you hear from me today? That's what I like to talk with you all about, and what would you do differently going forward? And I'd love to hear some of your use cases because I think that's where we can learn a lot from each other about experiences that you've had, because we're all probably fighting the same gaps in our businesses. And then I would love to hear from you, from my stories, what would you have done differently if you've had the same kind of experiences? And before I jump into that part, I'll always end with the quote, and anyone who knows Deming is, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So that's never more critical than in human resources, because sometimes we get tagged as people who are more about the feeling than the thinking, and I think you can do both. And I think data can be our friends, and that's why it's so critical when you work through these practices to have the right kind of data. So with that, that's my spiel, and I would love to now open up to a conversation or questions. Who wants to be the first one? And my team's in the back, so if no one asks a question, you guys better. It's bonus time. Sure.
So when you implemented the ServiceNow in India, how long did it take to get those people up to speed so that they could respond?
That's a great question. So the question is, how long, when we implemented ServiceNow in India, did it take? So interestingly enough, we had this whole sort of double bubble knowledge transfer, because I was building the India team as I was introducing ServiceNow. So we started at first in the US to get them oriented to how to answer questions and how to use this as a business process flow. And then as we began to hire India, we began to double bubble and train the folks in India on how to use not only the technology, but get oriented to the types of questions and the content that people would be asking. And also, at the same time, we worked on global business practices. Our issue was every region had their own way of doing things. And sometimes you need to do that because of country law or regulations, but very often it's just how it was done, and no one ever looked at it through a global way. And my goal was you could do a global process out of anywhere practically, unless there was some sort of regulation that you couldn't. So for instance, what we did is we hired the folks from India and we brought them to Springfield, Oregon for 2 weeks, where we had a location, and they did a knowledge transfer. And then the India folks went back to India, and we restructured the Springfield folks either into other jobs or out of the company, which you would say that's cruel and unusual, but the beauty of it is we were incredibly transparent about it. We deployed where we could deploy, where we couldn't, we gave people very rich packages. But I would say you can't pull off the Band-Aid immediately because your service levels will drop to the point where nobody will adopt it. So you have to be really thoughtful about it, because that's where the technology can get lost because you haven't rolled it out right. Thanks. Tracy.
I'd love to hear about your experience in doing it. We've been on multiple places. I've been on similar journeys. So we use Workday, and they are building in a number of things. So they have sort of robotics built in there. So for example, we went from generating, some crazy number of confirmation letters for people's mortgages to having that all be, done automatically through their system so that we don't have to do it. So I think many of us are using different technologies that we don't even realize are in our systems. And the thing I love about what you talked about is having the technical person on your staff. I think the biggest issue that I see coming for HR with all the AI and robotics that's coming is really lack of knowledge around HRIS. And so we need to, I think, educate ourselves about it. And so I hadn't thought about it at that level, having somebody engaged. When we split the companies, I tried to give HRIS to IT because I thought, that'd be great cost savings. I'll put it back in IT where it should be. And they didn't want it, which was not a good sign.
Yes.
Because they don't have much sensibility around employee experience, I find, in most IT organizations. I hate to generalize, but I do feel an urgency for us to look at, and we're looking at every area where it makes sense to apply some of the new technologies. But when you go out to many of the organizations, different partners I've interviewed, they're like, well, we haven't done this, but we'd love to partner with you, which I don't really want to pay on my dime to educate them on, and I become the use case. Are there any partners that you've seen that are particularly effective? I know our finance organization has done a great job. They've identified someone,
Yeah.
and there are many, to your point, there's so many in finance, quote to cash, whatever. They have 100 robotics things going on
Yeah.
in our finance organization that they're just knocking off one at a time, and they've created robotic centers in India and Houston, you know, for us. But I don't see the same in HR.
I don't see it either, and I think you're absolutely right, because they'll come and say, let me work with you on this, but they're learning as they go along. Yeah, so if you want to do it pro bono, yes, please come. But that's the issue, and so they're all kind of learning off of our backs, and so that's why I'm using finance as the one who's paid for it and say, could you help me with it? So I would say be bold in that front. Don't be afraid to ask for it, because that's what's going to help you kind of catapult it forward. As otherwise, you'll be the last to get supported, and by the time that happens, everyone's already far ahead of you, and you'll be behind the curve. And so anything about the IT thing, because I have Workday on my team. And there's been this battle back and forth with IT to say, bring it into IT. But all my Workday folks say, well, I'll quit if I go to IT. Not because I don't like IT, but they have a very specialized capability and a mindset around that. So we've kept a small team because, you know, Workday used to be really hard to get those skills. There's more in the valley, and there's a differentiation between who's really good and who's just okay. But they're skills you want to curate if you're using a particular technology, which we use, and we leverage them a lot for that. And there's a lot that I've learned that we haven't been exploiting with Workday.
Yeah, I just did the same thing. Yeah, so we're going through that right now to see all the capabilities. Yeah.
Yes. So another lesson, if you've got a technology, spend a little bit of money from a consulting perspective, have someone come in and do sort of a peer review, because maybe money you're leaving on the table with capabilities that you're not even turning on.
Just since you had the mic, Tracy.
Hey, Lisa?
So, yeah, hey, Amy, great experience that you're sharing. And just this is an odd question, but you know, what started out as like a cost exercise, right? You really, it sounded like you weren't given a lot of guidance. You were probably given a target, a percentage or something,
How did
right?
you know?
And
Yes.
it sounds like you, and we've all been there before too,
Yeah.
but you really kind of capitalized on that because it was probably, was it an opportune time anyway? Your business has gone through a lot of transformation. So did you kind of just look at this as this is my time to do everything that I've kind of been wanting to or thinking about, and you try to optimize it, it sounds like.
Yeah, I actually, and there's don't ever let a good crisis go to waste, you know that saying?
Well,
Because if things have been going really well, I'd be like, well, what the hell are you doing with my service level agreements? I want to talk to somebody on the phone, right? But then people began to realize we're all in this same issue. And my thing was always, I don't want to do unnatural acts to save cost and do things that will grow back. I could cut down HR services. I could say you're going to handle all of your talent acquisition, but those are dumb decisions because they get fatter in the business than they do in HR, and then we lose sight of the particular relationship to talent. So there's unnatural acts we do every day in HR, and let's just own up to it. But it was a great opportunity to say, let's resize this. And I fortunately had a very strong team who said, we're in it with you because we see the opportunity as well. But we've had our stumbling blocks. There's still some people we have to, even my rewards team, I don't think any of the rewards folks are here, are they, Mark? They hate to use the ticketing because we're in compensation, damn it. We need the information right now. And I'm like, well, just use it so I can understand where I'm missing it. So yeah, if you've got those opportunities, use them. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
What has the change management process been within your HR team in terms of these new ways of interacting with employees? Because I've certainly found that in working with organizations that sometimes HR is the hardest group to change, right? You can, end users are a lot easier than the HR folks.
I mean, we don't eat our own dog food, right? Or drink our own champagne. Well, it almost became like everyone had to be a part of it because if we were going to do it for the business, we had to do it for ourselves. So we actually used ourselves as a pilot first. And that's where we worked out the bugs and got the ownership. Because if you're your own use case, then it makes it a lot easier to ask other people to go do it. As I just mentioned, the rewards team still isn't on there, but they're getting there. But that I found was the best way to go do it. And then we created the whole sort of case for change. And not that I want to threaten people that I'd rather invest in technology than laying people off, but it's a really honest conversation to say I'd rather we'd work differently and smarter than having just to cut people because that doesn't serve anybody very well. So I used a lot of the burning platforms behind it, and then we did a lot of user experience, a lot of metrics, a lot of communication, and then we also used Agile as a way to do this development more quickly, and that also built a skill in HR, which was another really interesting thing, because if people feel like I'm doing this to learn and get better and have a skill I didn't have before I did it, then people are more likely to adapt it or to adopt to it.
Great.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Mona.
Hello. As you reflect back on this incredible HR transformation, is there anything that you would have done differently?
That's a good question. I'm still morphing my operating model, and I got to tell you, I'm a little bit schizophrenic, and I hope that you all can relate to this, but I really want strategic HR business partners who work on the most important things. But oftentimes, the most important things are the things that are kind of down here right now, because they're kind of care and feeding. And so the way I have my model is I have those kind of more transactional things happening out of a services center, which is fine, but sometimes people need a bit of a higher touch on some of those more transactional things that might be life impacting or career impacting. And so I sometimes have a hard time with balancing the strategic side of the business, but the strategic, like transactional things in the business. I don't know if I'm making sense here or not. But because you've got a bubble, and you can only spend so much in that bubble. If you squeeze a bubble here, it gets bigger here, and vice versa. So I think, I think we did a pretty good job of creating expectations for the business. But I do think at times I've got this HR business partner team, I've got this global solutions team, and I've got these HR managers in the middle who I'm trying to have help with more projects, more data analytics, more driving sustainable business practice. And sometimes they get stuck in the transactional, sometimes they get pulled into the HR business partner role, and I think I'm sometimes doing them a disservice. So I think it'd be a little more clarity around how does this operating model really work in the environment that we're in today. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Julie.
Hi, Julie, how are you?
So I love how you've articulated the transformation, and you touched on some important points that I wanted to share with the group in terms of where to get more information. So I don't work for ServiceNow. However, I did sit on a conference call recently with Pat Wadorfs, who's heading up ServiceNow, and she used to be the head of HR for LinkedIn. And they've surveyed 500 CHROs. And it's phenomenal, that white paper on that talks about a lot of what you've done, Amy, on that transformation and what it's going to take to retool and compete in this day today, and how CHROs are leading the age of digitization, because we're leading the employee experience, which is now how you're competing for talent. And that organizations who are going to be able to move from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 in technology are the one who are going to be able to differentiate the employee experience. And all the things you've talked about are captured in that, but they also provide tools and how can you create an audit of where are you at. So 74% of us are on level 1, and that's okay, and we're doing basic stuff, but where you're talking about in terms of leveraging the platform in order to create that different experience, and then thinking about where do we go, as the workforce is AI and chatbots and new skills. And, I love that you're doing it within HR and the agile learning around that and the how do you do transformation. I just wanted to share, because the example Pat talks about it's the notion that you said is consumerization of the employee experience. And what does that mean? And so if you think about how we're leading our lives today, we get up in the morning, you might do your mobile app, order your Starbucks, it's ready when you get down there. You get to work, you order a pair of shoes because you've got to go to an event that night. You get home, your shoes have been delivered, and taking your kids wherever you go. So like our life has changed, and we've got to create that experience for employees. And the most foundational questions in HR is, how hard is it for an employee today to get information, whatever that might be? And that's the starting point of the audit. I found the white paper extremely illuminating, and there's presentations on how you might want to think about it. So if anybody's sort of in that space and wants to have a look, that would be good. And then I think Amy's living it, so kudos to you. It sounds really exciting.
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, I was at the ServiceNow. They have like a big partner program, so I went there and was on a panel with CIOs, and we were talking about the reskilling of the new IT professional, because it's much more business driven, much more business acumen, and also reskilling folks to do cloud and data scientist work. And so I think ServiceNow's got some really interesting use cases around that.
Hi, so I have a question. I used to work for a company that shall remain nameless that separated the strategic HR business partner function from the shared services, more transactional. And I think that where that didn't work very well was the feedback loop from what was coming up through the transactional piece, because sometimes those are the early indicators, or the canary, so to speak, of what's going on with the business. And we did not do a good job about getting that back to the business partners and being able to kind of take action early. So have you done anything to build in that feedback loop from the way that you're collecting data from on the transactional side versus your strategic business partners?
Yeah, it's a great point, because I think we've all lived that. So a couple of things. So one, we do just a monthly report on the issues that come up. So we've got a bunch of data that's derived from the ServiceNow platform that helps us look at the number of cases we're handling, the types of cases that we're handling, the time to issue resolution, the regions, so all that kind of data. And then we're also starting to build out what I call operating cadence, which, if I had another thing I would talk about would be, you have to run your business with an operating cadence. And I think that's actually the CrowdStrike CEO talked about that this morning, which is how do you make decisions, who do you include, how do you communicate. It's that soft tissue stuff, because a report only gives you so much, but it's the sort of practicum you create on some sort of monthly interlock with the business partners, the HRMs, and the solution center leaders to say what seems to be beneath some of these issues that we're experiencing. And then we can get a little bit more predictive, Terry, in some of those things. Like, we know during the months of June in my company is when we pay out bonus. So we know there's typically going to be an exiting strategy around the June timeframe, or June-July timeframe. We know that in October, typically in our fiscal year, sales teams tend to leave because that's when they know they're not going to make their quota for the year. So we're trying to close the loop on things where there might be volume from just a transactional perspective, but also proactively, what is the retention strategies you put in place so you don't have those types of pitfalls. So I'd say we're okay on that front, but I think there's a lot more work we can do, and that's where you have to have those sort of teams get together and have those kind of live discussions versus looking at a static dashboard. That makes sense. Did you in the company you're at, did they go back to a different model?
They did not, and I think that I think it started as an initiative that seemed like a new and kind of creative way to approach HR, and then I actually think that it went along the cost aspect, similar to your position, where it really was just so much more cost effective. And they continued that until the company didn't exist any longer.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments or things you'd share that you've learned? Because I think sometimes we learn from other people's experiences better than just what we've learned. Okay. Well, I want to say thank you. I think you're going to probably wind up, but I'm available. I think our information will be online. I'll put my presentation online. If you've got questions, if you've got things you would think, hey, this would be good for Amy to understand, or you'd like to have some insights, I'm happy to share it with you. We're community first, and it's important that we leverage each other, because we're all, as I mentioned, all kind of having similar challenges that we're going after. So let's use this collective knowledge that we have in the room. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate the time.